بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to another lecture. We are continuing our discussion on judges, and today inshallah we will begin the discussion which I was not able to begin in the last lecture on the etiquette of the judge. Now this is a large topic. This is not something that I want you to think is confined to the one or two lectures that will occupy the course. And this is find very fascinating literature about the etiquette of the judge slash the mufti, of how the person is supposed to look, dress, act, be, how the litigants are supposed to be, how the judge is supposed to sit, how the judge is supposed to arrive, how the litigants are supposed to be equal in front of the judge, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time in the first lecture, almost kind of verbatim, just line by line, looking at the opening, maybe 2 or 3 pages that Imam al-Bayjuri radiallahu anhu has in introducing just the general etiquette. And the reason I want to do that is I want you to kind of be aware of the largeness of the topic and the importance of these very fine pieces of etiquette that is responsible. Now, even if you yourself never become a Sharia judge or a mufti, certainly you'll be a teacher at some point, inshallah. Certainly you'll be, helping solve people's problems. And these are the kind of things that you need to think about, that when you sit in that position, that you are helping solve people's problems. These are the type of etiquettes that you need to have. Indeed, these are the etiquettes of the mashayikh, of our teachers, etc. So that's why it's a big topic. It's a lot of adab. And I want to kind of paint that picture in the beginning. And then we'll begin the actual text, and we'll look at some of the things that he says, where the judge should have his court in the city, that there's no one should block him. And then we will look at the 3 etiquettes of the parties that are coming to the judge, that they have to be equal in how they sit, they have to be equal in how the judge addresses them, and the eye contact that the judge gives for both parties. That's the text, but we'll link that inshallah to the larger topic, as I said, because it's very significant. And those are the topics, or those are the points that will occupy this lecture. We'll begin inshallah in the next clip. So we'll begin the way we normally begin, which is to turn directly to the text, the Arabic text of Abi Shuja radiallahu anhu. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. ويستحب أن يجلس في وسط البلد في موضع بارز للناس ولا حجاب له، ولا يقعد للقضاء في المسجد، وتسوي بين الخصمين في 3 أشياء: في المجلس وفي اللفظ وفي اللحظ. So Qadi Abu Shuja radiallahu anhu, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and the next. It is recommended that the judge be situated in the middle of the region, in a place people can find with ease. He should not have a doorman and should not hold court within the mosque. The judge must treat both parties equally in 3 things: where they sit, how he addresses them, and the eye contact. So it sounds like it's a little, but as I said in the introductory clip, we're going to do a little bit of background. I don't think there's going to be much adillah. Actually, I didn't check before I hit record, but let me pop in quickly here and see if there's any adillah. As far as the hajib is concerned, the doorman, we have in Abu Dawood and Tirmidhi, on the authority of Abi Maryam al-Azdi radiallahu anhu, that he heard the Prophet ﷺ say, من ولاه الله عز وجل شيئا من أمر المسلمين فاحتجب دون حاجتهم وخلتهم وفقرهم احتجب الله عنه دون حاجته وخلته وفقره. So the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever has been given a position of authority over the Muslims, and then and then he cordons himself off, blocks himself from the people. In other words, he puts like a hajib, he puts like a doorman between him and the people. and their needs, Allah Ta'ala will, may Allah Ta'ala protect us, cordon him off, meaning Yawm al-Qiyamah, and not attend to his needs. Now, as far as looking at them and speaking with them equally, we have the hadith in Ad-Dar al-Qutni on Salama radiyallahu anha, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, "Man ubtuliya bil qada," and whoever has been given the calamity of being a judge, because it is a great calamity. Bayna nasi فَلْيَعْدِلْ بَيْنَهُمْ, so let them be just and equitable towards the people. في لحظه وإشارته ومقعده, in how he speaks and talks to them, in how he addresses them, and where he sits or where he has them sit. ولا يرفعن صوته على أحد الخصمين ما لا يرفع على الآخر, and do not, to raise one's voice unnecessarily on one party over another. Okay, so I'm surprised not a surprise, but there are some adilla that were important. Okay, this is a topic I have to say that I personally am interested in, because I do a lot of answering of questions for people outside of course the students. I answer people's questions a lot, and people reach out to me for fatwas and stuff like that. So I'm always thinking about, because of modern technology, I'm always thinking about, okay, how do you kind of transfer this in the modern world? As you can kind of see, it's important, because as you recall from the previous lecture, being a judge is no small matter. It's no laughing matter, and we don't want there to be any hint of impropriety. So let me just jump in and sort of read for you kind of quickly what al-Bayjuri says. So for the judge, and again, this is just a snapshot, this is not an exhaustive commentary or discussion, that he is supposed to come to the court in an appropriate vehicle. Okay? Rakiban, not walking, but rakiban. And then he should say salams to people on his right and on his left. And then when he sits for the job, he needs to be elevated so that people can easily see him, and that he can easily see people. And he should be distinct in his seat. The seat and the cushion, the chair, it should be different than the other chairs. It should be better than the other chairs. It should be nicer than the other chairs. And he should have an appropriate turban that distinguishes that he is a judge, as is the custom today at the time of Bayjuri's writing, even if he is a zahid mutawadi'an, even if he himself in his personal life is an ascetic and he is humble. And that's the point I wanted to get to off of the get-go, which is the judge needs to do these things because of the position of the judge, not because of the individual. So the individual, hopefully, as you will find in other literatures, is supposed to be zahid, is supposed to be, and when you read like the biographies of the judges, they're almost like, you almost feel like you're reading the biographies of Sufis, because it's almost indistinguishable. And as a matter of fact, many of them were one and the same thing. Like Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, the famous example in our madhab, a massive Sufi, radiallahu anhu, and completely without nafs, mashallah. But when you're the judge and you're sitting in this position, you have to, the office of the judge requires that. So why do you have to be distinct? So people know that this is the judge, and that he can strike awe in both of the sides, that this is a serious matter. He also says that when the judge sits, he should face the qibla, because this is if let's say I'm sitting as a judge, the qibla should be this way. And usually in the masjid, actually that's not the case. I was going to say something, but it's not true. So he should face the qibla. And then he says that he should say the following dua, and this comes in a hadith that's narrated in Abu Dawood, that's sahih, that he says, Imam al-Nawawi narrates in the Adhkar. I'm just reading the dua, it's very short. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika an adilla aw udal, aw azilla aw uzal, aw adlima aw udlam, aw ajhala aw yujhal alay. So, oh Allah, I ask you and your protection, I seek refuge in you, that I should misguide, and I should be misguided, or that I should cause somebody to fall, or somebody should cause me to fall, or I should be unjust, or somebody should be unjust to me, or that I should be ignorant, or that somebody should be ignorant over me. So when you say this, if you're a judge, whether you say it publicly or, I can see a scenario in which if we had like an Islamic Sharia court system, but this is actually how the whole thing would start publicly out loud. But obviously the judge could say it to themselves. But this kind of puts you in the mindset that this is a very sacred, trust that you are engaged in, and your job is to mete out a justice. And then he says that the judge should also seek advice in the matters in which there are differences of opinion. If it's like a clear cut, like the Quran clearly states that lying is haram, so you can't lie, or stealing is haram. You don't need to. What do you think about this? But there should be experts. When I was in Dar al-Ifta in Egypt, the Grand Mufti at the time, had many experts in all sorts. We had medical experts, we had financial experts, legal experts, political science experts. Not that there was like a room where like each room had these experts, but we had a network of people that could pick up the phone or send a message or an email and ask them, I have a question about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's also part of it. And Al-Bayjuri cites the verse وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, that you should ask them, you should seek consultation. Al-Hasan al-Basri radiallahu anhu, he says that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was in no need of seeking people's advice because Allah Ta'ala has taught him. وَلَكِنْ أَرَادَ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَتَكُونَ سُنَّةً لِلْحُكَّامِ. But Allah Ta'ala decreed that this would be a sunnah for the rulers and for judges. So the reason the Prophet ﷺ went, and this is an ishari, a tafsir. A lot of times people trip up on this. They'll say, oh, well, the Prophet ﷺ, he took people's advice in the planting of the date palms, or he took advice with Salman in the battle radiallahu anhu, the battle of the ditch, or he took advice where to place the camp at the battle of Badr, and they will say that, well, even the Prophet ﷺ needed advice. The real answer, like the Sufi answer, is no, he didn't, because Allah Ta'ala is giving him revelation. He doesn't need anyone's advice. But however, he did that to teach us that it's a sunnah, that we need to seek out advice when something is not clear. I'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so the last thing we talked about is having sort of expert advisors for specific issues, especially when, in the modern world, you have like a forensic expert, or you have, let's say it's a court case dealing with something about food and the food industry. So you'll have a food expert. There are people that, study food science. Or you have like some medicine, pharmaceutical company, so you'll need like a chemist or a biologist or something like that. So there's always going to have to be expert witnesses, in the modern world. And in the Sharia version of that, the judge, because there's no lawyers in this, it's the litigants and then the judge dealing with them directly. Lawyers could come later, but that just creates a level of like middleman that we don't need in this case, because the judge is supposed to do this. Anyway, the judge will have to sort of reach out. Well, I need to get an expert on this so I can make sure that I understand what's going on here. Those experts could be blind, he says. They could be slaves. They could be women, because here each one might have an area of expertise that somebody else doesn't have. Now, as far as what are the cases that the judge should see first, he says the first thing he should see are the people that are incarcerated. لأنه عذاب عليهم, because being incarcerated is a type of torture, a type of punishment for them, and it's a great injustice. I mean, sometimes it's necessary if the person's a criminal. I mean, Allah Ta'ala protect us. But he's saying that being in jail is horrible, right, for anybody, whether they are deserving or not. It's a great punishment. So he's like, start with those cases. So if there's somebody that has been unjustly incarcerated or unjustly put away, you can see him freely. And then you see issues of bequest, al-wasaya, because those are people that are claiming that they are owed money and they might need that money, etc., so on and so forth. Now, he says the judge should also have a katib. He needs to have a scribe with him. In the modern world, this is like a notary. Okay, so there needs to be somebody who is an expert at taking notes, an expert at, when you see like a drama, you see the person sitting there in that I don't even know what it's called. It's a stenographer, I think, the special machine. They're like typing. It's not like a regular keyboard, and they're taking the minutes of what's being said. Everything's got to be documented. So he said, in the Hashiyah, he makes a reference to what we talked about in the last lecture, maybe the last or either the last lecture or the one before that, about the judge being able to write is not necessarily a condition, which I find very hard. I can't imagine a judge that knows all of this stuff and doesn't know how to write. But let's say the judge has bad handwriting or is elderly or something like that, or the judge is simply just busy listening to both sides. There needs to be somebody that's recording all of this stuff. And then there are three types of documents. There's the mahadir, which is the plural of mahdar, which is basically stipulating, this is the docket. These are the litigants that came on this date, these are their names, and this is the case. So that's got to be recorded. And then there's the sajillat, there's the journal that's kept, the record that's kept of what actually transpired, what was the ruling of the judge. And then a version of all of that that's signed by the judge himself. Now, of course, in the modern world, whether in a Sharia court setting or a secular court setting, all of this exists. I'm just showing you sort of the traditional fiqh, and how you can come now to the modern world. We have to have all of that. In other words, and by the way, you can go around the Muslim world and you can find manuscripts, handwritten documents of these, like from the Ottoman period, and very rarely like the Mamluk period. You can find these. You can see, that there are these court cases. And I think even when I was at Princeton, I think one of my classes, a professor brought, a facsimile of some of these so we could read it. And it's in great detail. So obviously in the modern world, in today's time, it's all digitized. It's going to be digital, but there has to be a record. And then the record has to be kept, archived. None of this, we're just going to boot it up to the cloud and then, oops, the cloud went bad and we lost everything. You have to keep these things basically for as long as is humanly possible, i.e. forever. The mentality behind it is we got to keep these records forever. It's not just for like a little bit of time. So at some point there has to be a printed document. They're going to be filed somewhere, cataloged, archived, but we have to be able to go back, and then there has to be an index or indices about all of these court cases. And that's how we build precedent. So in the Muslim world, what we have is the catalog of great fatwa collections. Now sometimes these fatwa, and you see me kind of interchanging judges and fatwas, because the only difference between the mufti and the judge is that the judge's pronouncement is binding, whereas the mufti's pronouncement is a non-binding legal opinion. But it's the same type of legal, intellectual energy is required for both. You need to do the same stuff to arrive at the answer. So we might not have, all of the judicial pronouncements of like the Seljuk era or something like that. Maybe we do of the Ottoman. I'm not an Ottoman expert, but I wouldn't be surprised if in Istanbul somewhere there's like a huge, massive archive of all of these things. But what we do have and publish, and you can even download these, is we have Fatawa al-Hindiyya, very famous Hanafi collection, Al-Wan Sharisi, one of the last muftis of the Andalus. We have the Fatawa of Ibn Rushd. We have the Fatawa Al-Mahdiyya, who was Al-Mahdi al-Abbasi, who was a Hanafi mufti of Egypt. Egypt's modern Dar al-Ifta has published like a 40-volume catalog of all of the major fatwas from the time of, I think it was established in 1899 till I think about 2013 or 10 or something like that. So there are these are just rattling off things off the top of my head, but you find these cataloged, and it's important because then we can study them. So the reason we have to have all of these things documented is so we can study them. Now, the scribe has to be somebody that's beyond reproach. Okay, they have to be adil, dabit, just like the same kind of words that we're going to find in the transmission of the hadith. He also says that the judge needs to take a translator, because the litigants might not be speaking the local language. And if he's hard of hearing, he might need somebody who is speaking or repeating. In that case, you only need one translator or one repeater, because that's just a khabar. They're just transmitting what was said. But if it comes for like something that needs to be notarized or documented, then you need the set amount of people that require testimony. And then he says that there needs to be a holding place in the courthouse for the discretionary punishments, at-ta'zir, which I know is not part of the modern secular legal code, but when we talked about al-hudud wa ta'zir, we talked about that. And an interesting little fact, this is something I read for the first time, and he says that there needs to be a instrument of the discretionary punishment, and he said which is called a dirra. And the first person to take that was Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, and he used one of the old sandals of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make like a leather rod or stick that he would hit people with. And he says it was more fearful than the sword of Al-Hajjaj. Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, one of these khulafa, was very bloodthirsty and unfortunately has a very, very bad history. I mean, we don't want to talk about him. And then he said, وَمَا ضَرَبَ بِهَا أَحَدًا عَلَى ذَنْبٍ وَعَادَ إِلَيْهِ بَلْ يَتُوبْ مِنْهُ. And no one was hit with a discretionary punishment with that, which was basically the sandal of the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except that he left that sin and he even made tawbah from it. So there's like a little bit of a spiritual component to it. And the reason I bring up these things, I mean, Al-Bayjuri was mutasawwif. I think he was a Naqshbandi, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not any surprise that he's going to bring up these facts and little points, but it also shows that it's not just a one or two dimensional thing when it comes to courts and punishments. We have to mete out justice, and if people need to be punished, they need to be punished. But the point is not to punish them for the sake of punishment, but rather the point is to help them return to righteousness. And that's just, that is the barakah of the sandal of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like Al-Hasan al-Basri said, when he would recall the sandal of the Prophet, he would say, and he used to wear, na'lan na'lu bidhikrihi. He used to wear a sandal. We are elevated by recalling it. Because when Moses alayhi salam went to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Sinai, he said, فَخْلَعْ نَعْلَيْكَ فَإِنَّكَ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ طُوَى. Take off your sandals, you are in a sacred space. But in the Isra and the Ma'raj, the Prophet ﷺ was not ordered to take off his sandals. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, we'll come back to the text in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so I guess it took two whole clips, but that's sort of all of the introductory stuff. Again, this is just a drop in the bucket of all of the etiquette. Now, notice how we're talking about how the judge is supposed to dress, how they're supposed to arrive, how they're supposed to be treated, where they're supposed to sit, they're supposed to be distinguished, etc. Not because of the person, but because of the position. Because now you are going to sit and you are going to give out and distribute the justice according to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. So that's a serious thing, and therefore not to be taken lightly. Other than the academic and scholarly credentials, then you have all of these other sort of things from an etiquette point of view that make it, that emphasize that point. Okay, now the text. It is recommended that a judge be situated in the middle of the region in a place where people can find with ease. Now the fuqaha of our madhab, they debated this issue. Some people said it's absolutely necessary, and some said it's recommended. In the modern world, I mean, this is like a moot point, because if you're talking about a pre-modern city, the point of view of having the court or the judge's chambers in the middle of the city is that it's equidistant, because the cities usually had a wall around them, and they're not necessarily circular, but you can find a quote unquote middle point. So therefore, you are giving equal access to everybody. I mean, in the modern world, that's impossible, because the way cities are designed, not everyone that's part of that district lives in the city. Many people live on the outskirts of the city, and they have to come in. So, maybe there can be satellite offices. We also have things like Zoom now and kind of Microsoft, Google Meet or whatever they're called, And we have other digital ways if identity can be verified. There can be satellite offices and people can log in. So in the modern world, it's a little bit different. So I wouldn't get sort of out of sorts when it comes to this point. But the point is access. So forget about it has to be in the middle of the city geographically. The point here is that it has to have equal access. There has to be an easy way for all people to come. It can't be just in like the rich neighborhood, not in the poor neighborhood. It can't just be like inside the palace walls where like nobody can reach it. It has to be something that anyone and everyone can access. That's the point behind it. So sometimes when we read the text, I want you to also think, okay, well, what does that really mean? What is the illah, to use the language of the usul, what is the reason behind this law, so we can understand the point rather than get stuck at where it is geographically. Okay, now, as far as the court or the chambers, one interesting thing that's in the commentary is that it has to have a good climate. So it has to shade people from the extreme heat in the summer, i.e. in the modern world air condition or fans or something like that, and it has to protect people from the extreme cold in the winter, like heating or a furnace or something, radiator, whatever the case may be. In other words, this is a place that has to not only be equally accessible, but it has to be a place that's comfortable. I mean, it's difficult enough to have to go before a judge and like kind of air the dirty laundry and fight with another person or dispute. But it's got to be something that's comfortable. So, and that also comes back to the literature of the judge. I didn't get into it here, but one of the things that you'll read is that the judge or a mufti cannot sit to do their work if it's too hot, or if it's too cold, or if they're hungry, or if they're sleepy, or if they're angry. Because the judge or the mufti has to be able to give impartial advice, irrespective of who they like this person or they don't like this person, and therefore they can't have the elements impact sort of the way that they are thinking. Okay, and then the next thing about the doorman, he says, rahimahullah, he should not have a doorman, a hajib, and should not hold court within the mosque. So when it comes to the hajib, in other words, there should be no obstruction from people coming. Of course, you can't just like sit in a room and then have everyone walk in. When I first worked at Dar al-Ifta in Egypt, just anecdotally, there was no protocol. Literally, you can come from the street all the way up to whatever fourth floor where the mufti was, and you can literally go straight to the mufti's office. That became complete within like a month. There were literally people. It was chaos. I mean, it smelled bad. It was chaos. People were bringing food. I mean, okay. So you have to organize it. So organizing it and having a secretary or somebody that brings in like an appointment schedule, that's not the hajib. The hajib, even the word hajaba, is to block people away. That you can't, there has to be a way that you can access. So it's okay to organize it. Indeed, it has to be organized, especially now when we have billions and billions of people on earth. At the time of these writings, there were just hundreds of millions of people on the whole earth. So statistically, you have to realize that, again, the reason behind it is the easy access. There was something in the commentary about this point. Okay, so he says about this, Al-Bayjuri says, if he takes a doorman or he takes, somebody to block the people during the course of adjudicating the case, and there is no zahma, there is no crowd, then it's makruh. And he cites the hadith that we mentioned in the beginning. But if there is too many people, or he is in his private chambers, like he's having lunch, or he's like taking a nap, or he needs to say his prayers or use the bathroom, then it's not makruh. So the karahiyya of it, the ruling I should have said is makruh. The karahiyya of it is when there's no need. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. And then not being in the masjid, well, let's be honest. when people come to the court, they're not necessarily happy, so, or one part is not happy. So people are going to start yelling, raising their voice. I've had that. I've actually had to kick people out of the mosque. I was dealing with a family matter, and I mean, one of the people just was like off the rails. I was like, I'm sorry, you have to leave. We were in a side room because, we don't have enough resources to have our own like adjudicating mufti chambers or something. I mean, so we had like a side room, but we went away from the musalla. But man, the guy was just like yelling. I'm just like, and I actually have seen that. I've seen people being kicked out of Dar al-Ifta because they come, they're lying, it's clearly they're forging. I mean, some people are just not good at forging. Not that I'm advocating you should know how to forge, but it was clearly that the guy was lying. So I think he lied about divorcing his wife 3 times, and I only divorced her once. And I mean, I can't remember the evidence, but it was clear that he was forging and lying. And the Mufti, Allah rahamu, he was one of my teachers. He was killed during the revolution. Allah have mercy on him. He was a gentle soul. He stood up. He said, "Get out of here!" And I was shocked. And after he left, I asked my sheikh, the sheikh who did this. I was like, "What just happened?" And he explained to me. He's this point of law. But I was sort of, I saw it in action before I learned the theory. At least with me, you guys are getting the theory behind it. It can be very, very rowdy. So you can't do this in the mosque unless you are in the mosque like to pray, or you're in the mosque for Jummah, or you're in the mosque, he says, like Khalwa in Ramadan, and a dispute happens and then you adjudicate the dispute. That's different because you're in the mosque already. But the mosque should not be the place. If, like in the case as a Muslim minority, like in the United States where I am most of the time, where I do this type of work, and so you can have like a side room or a basement, or an office space. But to vacate the masalla, you're not going to sit there in the masalla, because the masalla, إِنَّمَا الْمَسَاجِدُ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. The mosques are for Allah, do not call other than Allah. So don't mess it up for other people. Let me pick up the pace a little bit. Now the judge must treat the parties equally, and 3 things: where they sit, how he addresses them, and eye contact. So if the judge is elevated, like you see like in a Western kind of court or an American court, which is the most common thing in people's minds, is that they're both, benches are in front of the judge. And then he speaks to them equally. So even you see in an American drama, the judge will say, will counsel please approach the bench. Both of them have to come, even if the judge is really only addressing one side for something that they need to hear, but the other side needs to hear. So the judge needs to speak to them equally, look at them equally, give them equal amount of time to speak. Very, very similar. I mean, this is not the best example, but it is similar to when we talked about polygyny and a man marrying more than one woman, if you remember back in marriage and divorce, and how a man has to be equitable. It's the same type of equity is required, so that there is no kind of stain or no hint of impropriety. Unfortunately, I've run out of time. I might pick up on these 3 points in the next lecture. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we were able to begin the discussion on the etiquette of the judge. And rather than just jump into the text, I spent a lot of time, it's about 3 pages in the Hashia, reading for you the different type of etiquette that is found about the judge, how the judge dresses, how he arrives, how he sits, he has to be distinguished, so on and so forth, to impress upon us that there is a seriousness to it. And then the judge is not by himself. The judge will have resources, will have experts, will have scribes, note takers, notaries, etc. And it's sort of a hustling and bustling place. Then we also learn that the judge needs to make their chambers or the courthouse in an easily accessible place. Even though the text of the fiqh book tells us in the center of a city or the center of a town, it doesn't necessarily have to be the geographic center. The point in the modern world for us is that it's easily accessible, because we can have satellite offices, we can log in online sometimes if there's inclement weather, like during COVID, a lot of that happened. As long as the protocols are there to be able to verify people's identity, and there are people there, deputies of the court, that can verify that. The point is equal accessibility. In a pre-modern city, you could basically have the geographic center, and that it was doable. In the modern world, I'm going to say that's almost impossible, just the way that cities are sprawling and the population increase. We also learned that the judge is not meant to do this work in the mosque, and the judge is not meant to block litigants to them unless there's too many people. But again, the point is easy access. And this is not stuff that you want to do in the masjid. This is stuff that you want to do in a dedicated space so that you don't mess up the prayer of the people, unless something happens in the mosque that the judge needs to act, as I mentioned. And then the last bit, which I really didn't do justice, I think I actually am going to pick up in the next lecture, is that the judge needs to treat both sides equally. Where they sit, how the judge speaks to them, how he listens to them, the eye contact he gives to both sides, because there can be no hint of impropriety. There has to be equal amount that the judge has weighed in the balance both pieces of evidence, and he has cast his ruling to the best of his ability based on that. You can't have somebody come back, oh, this is not fair, or this is a family member, or this or that. I mean, a judge could recuse themselves, I guess, if there was a conflict of interest. That certainly that can happen. But in general, because we're speaking in general terms, the judge needs to be equal. Those are the main topics we talked about. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.